Today here with me in the European Parliament in Brussels is Sinkevicius. Thank you so much for your presence.
Thank you for having me.
We are watching a lot of statements, a lot of actions from the United States of America. And what are we actually doing at the European level in order to prepare for what's next?
Well, I think, first of all, everyone was surprised with the change of foreign policy of the United States, with the change of geopolitical approach, of this, I would say, attack on allies, including Canada, Greenland, or Denmark in this case, because these were the countries that were supporting United States in their missions in Iraq, in Afghanistan. And of course, this transatlantic tie, which has been built after the Second World War, it seemed to many, I think, that it's unbreakable. Or at least not the United States themselves will do that. So of course, that's a bit of a new reality that needs to be accepted here in the EU. But on the other hand, I think it only reaffirms talks, which I've been addressing for the time that I'm an MEP, that Europe needs to build its own strategic autonomy. And we cannot count on someone to provide gas. We cannot count on someone to provide electricity, energy. We cannot count on someone to defend us. Europe is strong enough, and we should stop saying that Europe is weak, Europe is incapable. Europe is strong enough to provide for itself and build its own strategic autonomy, of course choosing partners around the globe with whom we will be working closely. But for that we need to deepen our single market. We need to ensure that we change approach towards our defensive policies, which until now was, of course, merely built on that Europe is a peace project, and always served to prevent peace through the economic and trade measures. Now, seeing the aggressive stance of Russia and the rhetorics from the United States, which in many cases, unfortunately, supports Russian narratives, we need to also have a significant improvement of our defense stance.
How much time do we need for this system to be done? How much money is to be put on the table for this?
Look, the war is never going to choose and come at the right time. The war is choosing the weak ones. So as long as we won't be preparing, we will be in a situation where we can be easily tested or attacked. At this moment, of course, while Russia is fighting in Ukraine, they don't have resources to suddenly launch an attack on the EU and NATO borders. But we don't know how the situation is going to evolve in Ukraine. At this moment, we see from the United States rhetorics that there are a lot of conditions, but all conditions are only to Ukraine. And I haven't heard many conditions being brought up to the Russian side. And even then, Vladimir Putin a bit laughs at it and say, look, we have our conditions, which not really are conditions, but they're ultimate goals that they wanted to reach in Ukraine from the very beginning. And those goals, they can fly even further than Ukraine. They can fly towards NATO borders. It's already been raised in Saudi Arabia, in talks in Riyadh, that NATO borders should be moved from the Eastern and Central Europe, including Romania, for example. So the Russian imperial ambition, they haven't disappeared anywhere, and only deterrence and our homework, which must to be done, that we, I think, a bit even late in doing so, can deter and make calculations for Russia that to attack Europe would be too costly.
Explain me what is the situation in your country regarding the defense area.
So of course we see ourselves extremely under threat, exposed, and I fully understand that, the understanding of the threat level is different between Lisbon and Vilnius. We share border with Belarus. we share border with Russia, and we saw that, even so that Belarusian troops were not involved into attacking Ukraine, but Belarusian territory was used by Russian army as its own territory to attack Ukraine. So we of course cannot exclude that if there is attempt to attack the Baltic states, Belarusian territory would be used again. So Lithuanian government now committed 5% of its GDP to spend on defense. For us, the key project now is, of course, a German brigade. According to NATO agreement, we are hosting a German brigade, so to fully accommodate a German brigade and also create additional Lithuanian division on top of what we already have. So basically significantly increasing our capacities. On top of that, purchasing of tanks, purchasing of fighter helicopters and etc. But most importantly, I think we should also have the European projects. So we are looking forward for the white paper. I hope we will have more spending on defense. I hope we will have it more, let's say, deepening understanding of the threat, so more joint procurements, and most importantly, a more European approach. So sending not only a signal to European industry, but clearly prioritizing European industry in our new defense spending, because we see now with the situation with Starlink that all those investments into the industry in the US at the day when we really need them can be just switched off, or some order can be signed and said that we cannot use it at the day that we really need them. So of course we should develop our European defense industry, invest into the European industry. That would mean additional jobs. In many cases, dual use of military goods means also a very successful startups in a way that we are actually, as civilians, use those inventions even in our everyday life.
How will this defense system of the Europeans will actually work?
I think we should concentrate, so the European one or joint procurement ones should concentrate on those that are extremely expensive for a single member state. So for example, we see that in Ukraine, one of the biggest issues were to close their sky. And we know that this anti-missile protection system to close the sky is extremely expensive. For example, a country like Lithuania on its own could not afford it. But 3 Baltic states or even countries around the Baltic Sea could do that. So therefore, I think especially in these big projects, so we don't overlap, we spend money effectively. We need to have a joint procurement where in many cases also we're not trying to replace NATO, but we're actually trying to fulfill NATO plans that in some cases just didn't have enough money, enough support to be fulfilled.
If we are discussing about money, from where should we cut in order to have the money for the defense area?
Well, first of all, we should not be talking about cuts, and we should not be,
but it's
playing this game, of one line against the other. I think first of all, the fiscal rules. For this moment, for this time, geopolitical time, fiscal rules are too strict. So first of all, I think we need to ensure that the fiscal rule does not apply on defense spending.
You are referring to what Ursula von der Leyen said about some countries that...
That's one of the options that would be possible, allowing member states to spend more. Secondly, I think, we know that already with the RRF plans, that common borrowing from the EU or on the name on behalf of the EU is much cheaper for member states like Romania, Lithuania, Bulgaria. Most of the countries actually except Germany is much cheaper. So we could also have now the proposal such as Rearm EU could also put in additional money. Yes, that's borrowed money, but I think we are trying to defend what's the most important and defend our economies. Look at Ukraine, where everything is destroyed. So let's take it as a cheap insurance policy. And with insurance policy, it's always like that, when you buy it, it seems expensive. And then when nothing happens, you say, well, maybe I could have not spend those money and use them on something else. But then if something happens and you get the full coverage, you say, well, that was the greatest investment. I hope we won't be tested, but at this moment, we really need to buy this insurance policy. And as I said, by easing the fiscal rules, because if you look at the EU debt, it's really far from what UK, Japan, or US, or other countries around, or China around the world has. We need to use those investors to stimulate our own industry, so creating jobs also in this industry. And on top of that, of course, EU common borrowing project would definitely help.
May we have an estimated timeline for this defense system of the European Union?
That's the thing with the defense investments, that it's not something that you can go and buy forever in a shop. It takes time, no?
And it's forever also, yeah.
Exactly. So therefore, some projects will be deployed gradually, and it will take time. The others, of course, can be deployed faster. That will depend a lot on the member states, because we have a different preparedness of the member states at the different levels. Therefore, member states' plans, I think, are extremely important, so that member states' plans could be also compared. And when we can have, joint procurements where we can avoid, overspending from the two different member states on the same thing, that must be also done. And that would mean efficient use of the resources.
What is, in your opinion, the biggest risk nowadays?
Well, the biggest risk, as I said, until Russia is fighting in Ukraine, there is no chance that they would attack. Yes, they can do a provocation, one missile can fly in and you never know about that. But the biggest risk is, of course, that we need to ensure that we get society on board, that society across Europe understands, why we need to invest into defense. We are now also fighting huge propaganda war. And it doesn't matter where the lies are coming from, the Kremlin or the White House, they still lies. And for us, I think we have to choose side. And that side is to protect the liberal democracy, is to protect the EU, protect the single market, the achievements that we have done. But also, by doing that, we need to bring our society on board, because we see that society is heavily confused. Look at Romania's case with the presidential elections, where millions were invested to brainwash society. And I think that's the weakness of democracy, that sometimes it's very difficult for democracy, which plays by the rules, to protect itself. But we need to find ways that, someone does not buy our rights and our democracy away from us.
I will ask you also, what is the biggest opportunity if you are looking at the situation on the market now?
The biggest opportunity clearly is to have this investments in defense here in Europe, connecting them with our strategic autonomy as regards energy, but also strategic autonomy as regards the industry, ensuring that we have supply chains here within Europe, that some of the things that may be done in Romania, but the supply chain can go from Poland, Lithuania, through Slovakia, and so on. So we have even better connection among the member states, even better use of single market, and most importantly, that can deliver jobs, that can deliver salaries, that can deliver paid taxes into member states' budget.
Will the citizens of the European Union understand what are now the risks and what are now the opportunities?
Of course, those opinions, they are different across the board. As I said, the understanding of the threats and the risks from Lisbon to Vilnius might differ significantly. Nevertheless, I think it's our work to explain to people what are the aims, why it's important to protect what we have managed to achieve and not to allow by anyone, by any country, to test it.
Thank you so much for being with us today.